Okay, we're going to move on into Chapter 8, which will provide you with an overview of the different types of joints of the body and the movements that happen at those joints, and special emphasis on the shoulder, the hip, and the knee joints, some of the special features there, since those are parts of the body or joints that are the most likely to be injured in a lot of people. And also we'll talk about some joint disorders here in Chapter 8. Again, your textbook is going to have a lot more information, especially with regard to the anatomy at particular joints. So I'll be cutting back on some of that material. All right, let's just talk a little bit about joints. All a joint is an articulation between bones, so it's where bones join each other, where they come to meet. They don't actually necessarily physically make contact with each other, because that actually would not be a good thing if you had bones rubbing up against other bones. That would be damaging and extremely painful. And when that does happen, it's not a good thing. So joints, though, are the places of articulation that give the skeleton mobility. Since the bones aren't actually physically contacting each other, they can do things like this. You can have a hinge movement, for example, at your elbow joint. And then the joints, another one of their functions, simply to hold the bones together. Bones are not fused to other bones, but they still need to be connected. So those are the purposes of your joints. All right, joints can be classified in two major ways, and the first of those is based on the amount of movement that's allowed at the joint. So some joints in the body are called synarthroses. That's kind of a tongue twister for me, which literally means without movement. A synarthrosis, that would be the singular form with an I rather than an E, is an immovable joint. So think about those suture joints in the skull. Those are not movable. I don't think you would want to be able to move your cranial bones relative to each other. So those are immovable joints. Then some are called amphiarthroses, and those are slightly movable joints. So where some bones come together, you want some flexibility. Like think about your two pelvic bones where you have that pubic symphysis, that little pad of fibrocartilage between the two. You want that to be somewhat flexible. You don't want that to be rigid, especially if you're a female and you're going to squeeze a newborn baby out of your uterus and out into the world. You want some flexibility at that location. And then finally, diarthroses are, I'm really having trouble saying these words today. Those are freely movable joints, like your elbow joint, your knee joint, your shoulder joint. Many joints are diarthroses because they're freely movable. So that's some terminology you want to know. And we're going to talk about the different types of joints that occur across the body and whether they are synarthrotic or amphiarthrotic or diarthrotic type joints. So we'll be seeing that again. All right, and then the other way that you can classify your joints is what they are structured from. What's the material that's holding the bones together? So there are actually three classifications for those as well. Some joints are fibrous, and all that means is you have some fibrous, dense connective tissue at that location, densely packed fibers. Sutures, again, sutures are an example of locations where you have fibrous joints. You've got a little thin strip of dense fibery connective tissue between the bones in your skull, between the cranial bones, and the other bones in the skull as well. Then you have cartilaginous joints. Those are joints where you have cartilage between two bones where they're coming together, such as the vertebrae. You've got those intervertebral discs, and those are built from fibrocartilage, and so those are examples of cartilaginous type joints. And then finally, the majority of the joints in the body that we'll be talking about are synovial type joints, and so they have Those have a special structure and some special features associated with them that we'll be talking about, including the presence, if these are two bones that meet at a synovial joint, you've actually got what's called a joint capsule that's surrounding that whole joint, and on the inside you're going to have some fluid in there that's surrounding the ends of the bones at that location and helping to lubricate and protect the joints. So the synovial joints are going to be your diarthrotic joints, the ones that are freely movable. Those are all fall into that synovial category. All right, that was just a little quick introduction to how the various joints of the body are classified, these broad classifications. And now we'll move on and we'll talk about more specific examples of fibrous joints and cartilaginous joints and synovial joints as we move through Chapter 8.